Welcome back to Weekend Agenda. Time now for our regular Saturday panel this afternoon. Simon Breheny from the Institute of Public Affairs and Rod Campbell from the Australia Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Might go first of all briefly to this Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, an organisation set up in Melbourne, believe it or not, a decade ago, now spread right across the world and has been recognised with a Nobel Peace Prize. Simon Breheny, to you first. I guess at the very least this is a better award than that given to Aung San Suu Kyi, as it turns out.
We might be able to debate that at the margins, but you know, I'm a little bit sceptical, I have to say, of the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, it's not like the other Nobel Prizes where you actually have to achieve something pretty significant in the area of scientific research. And when it comes to the abolition of nuclear weapons, while we might like to live in a utopia where you don't have international conflict, the reality is that they are around, and it's very, very unlikely that we're going to be able to take them out of the hands of some of these guys who do some pretty nasty things. So in that sort of world, I think it's pretty important that the guys who are doing the right thing around the world and trying to maintain order also have them. So I'm not actually sure that the goal of peace is best achieved by getting rid of nuclear weapons altogether, particularly given the conflicts that are going on around the world at the moment.
And Rod Campbell, there is a problem, is there not, that as the technology for developing nuclear weapons becomes more readily available and the sophistication of manufacture becomes easier and easier, that it's not just countries like North Korea that are now getting hold of it, but there's a possibility of non-state actors as well, whatever the best interests that an organisation like ICANN has at heart?
Yeah, sure. But as your last guest, who I understand is part of that group, said, you can't make a nuclear weapon in your backyard. But more importantly, I think what this shows is also what he was talking about is the importance of civil society engagement in these sorts of issues. It's crucial to have non-government organisations and research groups and NGOs and advocates playing an active role in our security and defence policy. And that's a really important lesson to be learning at the moment, when NGOs and charities are under unprecedented attack here in Australia, with their tax-deductible donation status being overtly attacked by groups like the Minerals Council, with a lot of sympathy from the coalition government. So this really shows the important role that civil society groups play in issues as diverse as nuclear disarmament, environmental protection, and looking after less fortunate Australians.
That's a whole other argument about charities and taxation, and undoubtedly we will cover it in coming months and years on Weekend Agenda and right across Sky News as well. I want to turn now to Nick Xenophon's bombshell announcement of yesterday that he's going to retreat from Canberra and take on South Australia once more. Simon, this is going to be a considerable challenge for the Liberal Party in particular in South Australia, because if you look at the statistics and look at past elections, more of Xenophon's votes come from the Liberal Party, and he's a more effective transmission belt in getting votes from the Liberal Party to Labor than going back the other way.
Yeah, boy, he's clever, isn't he? What a politician Nick Xenophon has become over the last decade. He is someone who is able to pick his moment, and I think in this one he's done exactly that. In resigning from the Senate, there was obviously a cloud over whether he was going to be able to continue in that role because he was caught up in this dual citizenship debacle. He now won't have to go through that High Court process, so in picking up now in South Australia, he's going back to where the heart of the Nick Xenophon team resides. He is in a seat which is winnable for him. I mean, you know, he's got a very significant profile. He will be the highest profile candidate running in that election. And the focus around Nick Xenophon and the media storm around his decision to move from the Senate to South Australian state politics, I think, shows that he is going to be a force to be reckoned with, if only because he is able to control a media narrative basically like no other politician right across the country. So this will be a fascinating one to watch, incredibly frustrating for the coalition, for the Liberal Party in South Australia. Because they're already up against it. I mean, it's been a very, very successful Labor outfit in South Australia, and they would be hoping, after so many terms of Labor being in government, that they'd be in a position, Stephen Marshall and his team, to form government after the next election. This is certainly going to throw a spanner in the works and make it more difficult for them, but they've just got to keep pressing on.
I'll come to you in a moment, Rod, but I just want to stick with Simon for one moment. Isn't it something of a commentary on the quality of the Liberal Party in South Australia that the Xenophon team has managed to get such a hold on the electorate? I was looking at the figures yesterday. Sturt, Chris Pine's seat, which covers much of the electorate that Nick Xenophon's going to run in. If the Xenophon team had got 1 or 2% more of the vote in the federal election last year, they would have won it. Surely that's a commentary in part on the quality of the Liberals in South Australia.
Well, possibly. I mean, I think it's more likely that Nick Xenophon has been able to basically set himself up as the South Australia party. I mean, although it's called the Nick Xenophon team, although he runs federally, really where the heart of the party is in South Australia. And I think a lot of South Australians probably identify with the Nick Xenophon team because they feel as though he is there to represent South Australia's interests. The Liberal Party obviously has got a broader brand strategy. It's got to represent people right across the country. They've got divisions in every state and territory, so it's a little bit of a different kettle of fish. But having said that, yeah, I mean, you know, the reality I think for the South Australian Liberals is they need to harden up. They've been doing that over the past few months, but this is certainly going to be a bit of a wake-up call for them. And I think really the point of difference has got to be, because it will be a point of difference with both the Labor Party and with Nick Xenophon, energy. That has got to be right at the heart of the Liberal Party's fight over the next election, and they've got to make sure that their policy is as different as it possibly can be from both the Nick Xenophon team and from the Labor Party in the lead up to the South Australian state election. Not to mention the Australian Conservatives will be coming at them from the right, and of course it's Cory Bernardi's home turf as well. Rod, in leaving Canberra, where Nick Xenophon has been so effective as a politician, as something of a power broker, deal maker and so on and so forth, how seriously do you think the NXT team will miss his skills and his ability at self-promotion? Do you think that there is reason to believe that the NXT team in Canberra could go the way of the Australian Democrats? Oh, look, obviously that's a live question, but they're pretty talented and smart people, the Nick Xenophon team here. I think Rebecca Sharkey's done a very good job in the lower house. I think Skye Kokoschky-Moore and Sterling Griff are very solid senators, and they're the sort of senators that I think Australians like seeing on the crossbench. You know, they're pretty real Australians with pretty real Australian views. So I don't see this necessarily as a retreat by the Nick Xenophon team or a leaving of Canberra. I think they've still got several very talented parliamentarians here. And do you think that we've already seen within 24 hours he's got handpicked half a dozen candidates, and one of them's already fallen by the wayside with some pretty unsavoury pictures posted on Facebook. This could be something of a setback for him, Rod?
It could be, but let's have a look at the big picture of what's brought this about. 12 months ago, Jay Weatherall was looking pretty damn silly, really, and pretty unelectable. He was running around Finland talking up nuclear waste dumps and running a Royal Commission trying to talk South Australians into going nuclear in a way that none of them wanted generally and was clearly economically disastrous. Jay was really on the ropes. And in the last year, we've seen him absolutely turn that around in relation to exactly what Simon's just talking about, energy. Suddenly, Jay Weatherill is building batteries, he's looking at smart grids, demand management. He's absolutely trounced Josh Frydenberg a couple of times on energy matters. Suddenly he looks like a statesman and suddenly he's electable again. So I'd actually argue in the big picture it's been energy politics and the bungling of it by the federal government that has created, again, a really tight race in South Australia, one that probably should have been looking like an easier win for the Liberals. And so it's been the bungling of federal energy politics with a focus on South Australia that's created the absolute perfect conditions for Nick Xenophon's return to South Australia. And yeah, I think it looks good for him on energy politics. Nick is anti-wind, he's pro-solar, he's pro-storage. All of South Australia's wind has already been built. So the things they're looking to build, he'll be for. The things that are already there are the things that he won't be able to impact much. So I think energy politics has actually gotten Nick Xenophon there. And I think he's in quite a good position to be able to do exactly what Simon suggests, play South Australian energy politics really well.
Do you think, Simon, that without Nick Xenophon returning to South Australia, that the Nick Xenophon team, or SA Best as it's branded in South Australia, would have been able to break through into the lower house of the South Australian Parliament?
Oh, I think that's such a fascinating question, and of course we'll never get the counterfactual now, but I think they're in a much better position with Nick Xenophon there. The fact that he's going to be able to be there not only campaigning on the ground with other candidates, but to be a candidate himself, I think is going to make a significant difference. And certainly for those candidates running as SA Best candidates in South Australia at the next state election, they'll be looking at this as a significant increase in their stocks, as they should. I think that's correct. I just think the reality for Nick Xenophon is that this was a great get out of jail free card. There's other issues going on in the background, and he now has dodged those to move into South Australian state politics. I think it's a brilliant move, and I think it will set them up very well. We'll see just how strong that result is, and I think that given that this party really is a cadre party, they could go the way that the Australian Democrats did, and potentially sooner than the Democrats did, because my suspicion is that as soon as Nick Xenophon moves on, there will be no party anymore. Even if they're able to extend this branding to something else, they might have to call it something else once Nick Xenophon does actually leave. I think it's very, very unlikely that any of them will achieve the kind of success that Nick Xenophon has as the leader of that party.
I want to turn to another issue and ask you this first, Simon. This is the new anti-terrorism laws endorsed by the special COAG meeting in Canberra earlier in the week. Are you baffled, as the Labor Party is, by these new laws which would allow the authorities to detain children as young as age 10 for up to a fortnight?
Look, I think it's really important that the government is prepared to review national security laws to make sure that the police and our security agencies have the powers that they need to go after terrorists.
I do wonder this though, Simon, that if they had felt comfortable about this would have been central to the announcement in the joint press conference that was held at the end of COAG, rather than emerging in radio interviews and being effectively drawn out of the from the minister, from Justice Minister Michael Keenan, sort of like a dentist drawing teeth.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that they just wanted these changes waved through. I mean, they got a sign-off very quickly from state premiers, even from those on the Labor side. A lot has been made of Daniel Andrews signing off on this set of measures. And I think that the government hoped that they were able to get these through without really much fuss. That's, I think, probably more the reason why this was announced sort of later on in the program, and that there are other things that were discussed at COAG which were up front and centre. But I'm concerned about this, as I am about a number of measures that have been put forward. This national database based on CCTV footage, based on driver's licences that will allow the police to track people as they go about their daily lives, I think is a very concerning part of what has been discussed this week. And I think it's an indication of the growing threat to civil liberties that exists whenever we start talking about national security laws, because while I think it is important that police have powers to go after the bad guys, the reality is that we can't trust the government with our private information. It's very unlikely that there will never be a threat to people who haven't done the wrong thing if we give them more and more powers that allow for further intrusions into our lives. So I think this is a really significant problem, and I would have loved to have seen a bit more of a discussion about the civil liberties implications of some of these laws this week.
Rod Campbell, Michael Keenan, the Justice Minister, when he did explain why he thought there was a need for the authorities to be allowed to detain kids as young as 10 years old for a fortnight, said, unfortunately, the reality of the situation we find ourselves in is that Islamic State specialises in recruiting children. Is that a sufficient justification for what is a very draconian measure indeed?
Well, look, I'm no expert in the radicalisation of children, but what I think's really wrong here, and again, I really agree with Simon, is the lack of debate around this. And this is actually symptomatic, I think, of a wider problem in Australian policy debate, is the assumption and the default setting of complete bipartisanship in the major parties around national security, defence and largely foreign policy issues. The Australia Institute's done a bit of research on this, and it's taken as given that we will have bipartisanship on all these issues. These are issues that should be being debated on the floor of every parliament in Australia, but they're not. As you just said, every state signed off on this. You know, there was a bit of pushback from Andrew Barr here in the ACT, but there is no debate around whether such measures are necessary, if so, how they should be implemented and what backups might be necessary. The absolute assumption and practice of bipartisanship between the major parties on national security issues doesn't allow for our democratic processes to do their job and allow people to debate the merits of policies and how they should be implemented. I think it's a big problem, and it's one that it's a position, I think, that's taken for purely political reasons. Neither party sees any political advantage in deviating from it. I think it's done for political advantage, not for policy quality, and I think it's a problem that continual bipartisanship is the default setting for a wide range of really important issues.
Rod Campbell from the Australia Institute, Simon Breheny from the Institute of Public Affairs. Do appreciate your time this Saturday afternoon. Thank you very much.